Welcome to the ILIA support pod. We are here to support each other. Today, we're doing facilitation on Zoom. What does it mean? How do we do it? Let's turn it over to Vic. Welcome, Victoria Perez.
Thanks, Bet. Hey there, Dan and Eric. I did not meet you last time, and I don't think we've met before. Victoria Perez I sit on the board with ILIA. I've been involved with ILIA for quite a few years now. Michael McElhaney is my uncle and invited me to the tribe many years ago. My first event was in Austin. Since then, I've been part of the group. And today, Kim and I will be facilitating, but not really facilitating. I'm based in Dallas, Texas, but I'm currently down in South Padre Island, Texas, which is on the very southern tip of Texas, where it feels like 115, but I'm close to the water and the beach, so it feels like 90, which is fresh. And then my day-to-day real job outside of ILIA is I work for a global HR consulting firm, and I am the US leader for learning and development for a segment of our business. Kim, I'll pass it over to you, friend.
Thank you. Kim Harpham, and Eric and Dan, you know me, but for the recording, I'm on the ILIA board, and I have been since, Dan, your open space idea burgeoned forth, flourishing into a 501c3, and I was part of that formalization process. And now, just so you guys know, I still am, I can't stop. I just believe in teaching and learning. So I'm working at Southern Oregon University with holistic education, and then I still think this is important. So what I wanted to have whomever was here today know is that Vic and I want to have this as like an inquiry. And based on how many people were here, we wanted to make it pretty informal. So Vic and I are going to just talk. And in fact, we don't even mind if everybody has off their mute button and we hear each other breathe. We just want this to be an emergent conversation. We have ideas we want to put forth, but we also are going to open it to a lot of conversation here and there. So Vic has put into chat the ideas that she's going to put forth right now.
So you might have heard from Bet's introduction from the last couple of sessions, if you've joined, the idea of support pods. And we want it to be a slightly prescriptive in the beginning of this session because it is going to influence how this session and support pod is run today. So Kim and I think that support pods are one, part of the ILIA community and should be, and two, create top of mind content and keep ILIA's content kind of in the forefront, something that I think has missed out on in the last few years. We also feel support pods could be an experimental place to play, to idea share, to test things that are new and maybe unheard of, or we are uncomfortable with putting them out there. And then lastly, we feel that it's a support pod or a space to support me like this. And so if ever, Dan, there's a time, or Eric, there's a time that you would like to facilitate or host your own support pod, we hope that you just tell us how you want to be supported. So the rest of the audience and group participating can play a role in that support for you. Kim, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, just that supporting us like this. So I'll just say it for us. We really are going to experiment with these ideas, and we really want your input. We want it as conversation. So when we say that, we mean it. Modeling, inaction, leadership. So support us like this, we're going to actually hopefully generate ideas. So today, I'm going to just kind of ask some questions really quickly here. So we are looking at this as an inquiry and also as a bit of hypothesis about how integral leaders might see and practice facilitation differently than traditional corporate or bureaucratic or other kind of leadership? What is it that we in Integral do that's different from what Vic does when she's doing her HR for her international corporation, what, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I just have to tell you, I looked at I was talking to Vic, whose family there, you know, she's down there by the very bottom of Texas. And I went, Spanish, facil. Oh, facilitation, ease, like making easy the audience, like making easy the learning in the teaching learning situation. Oh, facilitation. I get it. And that put a different spin on it for me. So it was Vic and I we started asking, you know, what's facilitation versus what is that talking head thing that we've tried to avoid in ILIA? You know, what's old school collaboration versus what Aftab Omer at Meridian is called collaborativity. We'll go about that more later. And then also, how do we do this as embodied integral? So again, ILIA in action. So what does facilitation look like with embodied engagement? Vic.
Thank you, Kim. So Dan, Bet, and Eric, now that you have our intention for what we believe support pods can be, now that you have what we have coined our inquiry and hypothesis around facilitation, your turn. Name, location, and if you can think about your most recent engagement in a facilitation, did you participate in some sort of facilitation? Did you facilitate something? What was it? How did you feel about it? Bet, go ahead.
Before we jump in, is this just on Zoom or is this any kind of facilitation and on any medium?
Anything.
Okay. All right. I'm going to try to answer all the questions. Bet, Oakland, California, USA. What's my latest facilitation? Yes. So I teach yoga. So yoga is facilitation. It really is, right? So I always ask my students, and the latest one I'll just use this morning's class. I teach it as a yoga. It's actually on Zoom, which is kind of funny. Very ironic, right? Yeah, so I teach yoga and I only had one student show up today. And so I asked her what's going on with her. She told me she slept poorly. So I really dug in. I asked her about a lot of questions. She had biked 20 miles over the weekend. And I customized the class just for her. And I kept checking in with her to see if she was enjoying it, how was the experience. And then based on her feedback, I would adapt and change things or shorten things or add a new exercise. And then at the end, she said she really enjoyed it. So I guess I won that one. So that's my latest facilitation.
Well, thank you for sharing. Dan, you're unmuted, so I'm going to go over to you.
Okay, hi all. Dan, live and work out of my home in Santa Rosa, but the most recent facilitation for me, well, I facilitate constantly through the week because I run a state association plus my own business. So I'm facilitating and endeavoring to lead all the time. But thanks to this group and Integral Leadership in Action to begin with, I'm really focusing on how to lead from the heart, but also all levels and all lines and all states, believe it or not, at one time. Not that we can be in all states, but I do practice meditation, and I try to I continually read in other fields, but bringing together basically a couple things for me. One is to have a direction, where are we leading people to, but then also where are they coming from in their own journey, personal journey, and why are they engaged in this, in whatever group I happen to be leading. So for me, that the understanding of that, the listening, the creativity is what I'm constantly striving for. And that's why, for me, when we get to more of a discussion of what the the reason I've returned to ILIA is I finally felt I was ready after starting it. You know, what, 15 years ago or something like that. So I feel like, oh, maybe I'm ready for this now. Because I really wasn't. My life took a lot of twists and turns, but I want to work with you all and all the others who have registered to bring integral leadership into my work. And that's the reason I'm here.
Cool. Thank you for sharing, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Eric?
Yeah, so Eric in Dillon, Montana. And yeah, I'm trying to think of examples of recent facilitation because I'm not doing that as much as I used to. I worked for many years as a professional facilitator. I hosted all kinds of events for a diverse range of settings and organizations and so forth. So I had the things I did, and I appreciate in the question the moving away from the traditional corporate or bureaucratic leadership or things that have a certain kind of agenda, because I've always been more interested in experimental things. So in certain spiritual practice communities, for instance, where specifically we're playing with we space, I would try to lean into that. Something that was maybe in the last month, I wasn't facilitating, but I played a role with someone who was. I was attending a series of programs for the World Executive Coaching and Business. Was it W. Beck's? But anyway, it's for executive coaches worldwide. It's an international audience. They have big name speakers. I mean, we're talking, some of the top names that you can imagine. And then they have what's called an implementation mastery session, where afterwards people break out into all these small groups and you're with a facilitator. And I pushed the edge of being experimental because the person who led the main session, I think it was Jean-Francois Cousins, he did coaching for someone who spoke in a language that he didn't know. He did it live to try it out. She spoke in Spanish. He didn't know Spanish. And he was trying to read her energy and give a coaching session via, translation. Or I guess she understood. He spoke in English and she understood English, but he didn't understand her. And it was really intriguing. So afterwards in the breakout session that I did, I proposed, the facilitator was from India. I said, do you speak Hindi? Is that your native language? Yes. I said, okay, let's just play with that. You speak in Hindi and let's see if we can do that now. It turned into a really fascinating session, but I think the key principle there that I want to underscore is taking a risk to do something, because this is, the World, Business Executive Coaching Forum, whatever. They have a certain way that they go about things. That was a bit edgy for that community to say, okay, let's just try what we witnessed here in this main session and see if we can do it ourselves. And I was really pleased with the way, it felt generative. It felt, like we broke into new territory, and afterwards it was not that many participants, but we're all kind of like energized by that. Like, it's, wow, we don't know what's going to emerge here. And so that's something that intrigues me at moving forward into an ILIA kind of space. It's like, how do we push the edges a little bit more and be experimental and be willing to fail? Because sometimes you try something, it doesn't work, and then you can look at, why didn't it work? What might help make it work, or whatever. But to break away from the tried and true, and the deliverables and all that other kind of stuff, that's intriguing to me right now. So I'll pause there.
Cool. Thank you. So I'm going to reflect back.
Yeah.
Kim, real quick, I'm going to reflect back.
Yeah.
Okay. So in so many words, everyone said kind of the same thing. checking in, adapting, listening, ready to engage, experimental, living in the moment, reading energy, risk, feeling energized from the moment. And then the last one, willing to fail, which I like. So I'm going to throw it in there, even though Eric, I think, was the only one who mentioned willing to fail. But I don't think you mentioned that you wanted your yogi to fail today. So, okay.
That's what I wanted to talk about. So I agree. What I heard is that resonance in me about the word facile, ease, easy. So Eric, I want to throw out, hey, but risk, do we have to look at that as like, oh my God,
Such a negative.
And so I heard us use different language, and I want to talk about that later. I heard us talk about our body experience, our mind experience, and our spirit experience, and we'll talk about that more. But I want to throw out this idea again of how do we open a space? What is the name of that space? So that kind of questioning. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to nod to Bet and say, when Vic and I brought up this idea, she goes, yeah, because we have all these connections all over the world. The problem statement is, how do we keep that and expand that? How do we get ILIA? And the answer is, of course, cyber platforms, Zoom, etc. So then how do we have a cyber experience resonate the same way as the space that we would try to open in person? So I have a series of questions, and I'm just going to ask a question and then be silent for a minute and just have us do some inward reflection. But I want to start with this notion of Meridian University, that the next step of collaboration is collaborativity. And the definition that they give is something like actualizing the potential of the entire system. Now, isn't that interesting? So an entire social system and actualizing the potential for that. And I'm going to go back to this word of ease. How do we actualize the potential of our space with our audience, our particular time? So hang on. So I'm going to ask a few little questions, and then Victoria will make it further, but I'm just going to have us think. So how do we virtually model our ILIA kind of values? In other words, the worldview that we have when we're having a group gathering. What's our intention? Just think about that for a second. How do we reflect? How do we reflect it in a cyber gathering? What are we modeling? How do we actually act as a leader? Next, we're talking about creating embodied experiences. That's what our event in October is about. So how do we create, what's an embodied experience? We'll work on that from now until October. But how do we create that kind of an experience on a cyber platform? So in your work, what is it that you do? Now I'm going to say, how are we aware of our intentionality? How are we aware? How are we self-aware in creating that kind of a space? Now here's a nice term: rules of engagement. And in holistic education, we'd say the invisible structures. But what do we have rules of engagement? Do we have expectations? Do we have, you know, a line at some point, a boundary at some point? How do we define that in our thinking about this? Then I'm just going to kind of link this together. Intention. How do we express that intention? Like language. What language do we even have words to express what we're talking about? And then Vic and I said that our working hypothesis on this support pod and on this idea of facilitation is that we're saying our intention is to create a mutual, meaningful learning enterprise that we embody. And then we said, oh yeah, collaborativity, actualizing the potential of the entire system. But, you know, then we laughed and said, what's that mean? Help us figure it out. Vic.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So the questions Kim is just asked us to think about and to reflect on and do some internal maybe assessments was really the questions we were pondering ourselves from a group of board members from ILIA. We know our values, we know our mission. We're going to put up this event in October. We started asking ourselves these questions because leading up to the event is these support pods and they're Zoom friendly. Everything is in cyber world now because how do we connect with our connections around the world and stay connected? So before we move on to the next section, I'm curious, I saw some note taking and some eyes seemed like they were thinking. Any reflections you'd like to share with the group on some of these questions?
Yeah, I would actually a little bit. Part of my practice ongoing is being clear about what I'm feeling in the moment. And I mean, somebody else can check in with me, but I trained myself since a kid to not really be that expressive emotionally. But I think emotions and energetics can come through in cyberspace. And emotions, I like the way to think about emotions as the body's response to my thoughts. Because I'm in this little, personality over here, this ego that is interpreting and perceiving and wanting to participate and make friends with you all, because you're all now like new friends, even though Kim, we go way back. There's been a 15-year interlude. So I've been doing a lot of inquiry, reading, practice in relational space. My wife is in the living room. I don't know, maybe she's napping or whatever, but I've been married for 52 years. So I haven't jumped around in a lot of intimate relationships, but in my work, I'm finding that my work is more about relationships than it is about concepts. And so how do I get into that space? I've been going back and actually doing a deeper dive in, I don't know if you folks are familiar with Gay and Kathleen Hendricks. They've been psychologists and teachers and counselors for decades. They have a lot of works, I don't know, 12 books or whatever. I happen to be working through one of their books called Conscious Loving. And that was an old one in the 90s. And then the one I'm listening to now and practicing, because it's a lot of practice of conscious loving and making commitments and moving from codependent to commitments. And one of the practices that I'm working on right now is making a commitment to love and creativity in all of your relationships. Your primary one with your spouse or your partner, or your boss or your family or whatever. But in ILIA, what I'm finding is that as I'm doing my work of economic and material and social transformation, it's all about relationships and living into a new culture. And so for me, that was one of the reasons I came back to ILIA after I'm doing another course in parallel called Pro-Social. We can talk about that. But there's a lot of work going on right now in this space. And I felt that ILIA is perfect. But I think all the questions you're asking are right on. They're spot on. How do we create that space through a medium that strips away our touching and our actually our aromas too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We can't smell each other's BO or perfume or whatever, but that's important. And so we're flat, you know, we're on a flat screen here. So I think just being in touch with my emotions in the present. And so I'm excited to work with the pod and to re-engage. Anyway.
I love it. Thank you, Dan, so much. Bet has her hand raised.
Yeah, I feel
What a
like
good student.
Yes, cyber. Woo!
I like to use the rules of engagement. So I think the number one thing that comes through for me is respect. And it's very basic. Time zones. Like we're all in different time zones and being respectful. Like if someone joins a meeting that I'm facilitating and they're joining at 6 a.m. their time, they're making a big sacrifice. And I think just being thankful and acknowledging maybe their hair is a little messed up. So that's something big that when we're all in one place, maybe some people are jet lagged, but at least we're all getting onto the same time zone. I think even if people do fly in, I usually try to be respectful of their jet lag. So that's just one big embodiment thing. And then breaks, whenever I create an agenda for an online engagement, I either say, like, if you need to take a break, just turn off your camera, mute yourself, and go take a break, please. Or if we're doing something shared where we're discussing a very important topic and it's very engaged, then I'll schedule breaks so we can all take a moment and we're not feeling, we're missing something. So I think just that respect is really important when you're building a digital facilitation. So I'll throw those in as my tips or thoughts on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Bet. Appreciate it. Eric, anything? And no pressure, you don't have to.
Yeah. Lots of things coming for me. So just thinking what is most relevant and useful here. But I think, one of the things is a weaving together of what's important. So as you ask these questions, and I listen to Dan, and I hear, what's important to Dan, and Bet, as I listen to you right now, what's important about the respect, then part of the following a thread is for me to acknowledge both of those, and how does that live in me? So when you say respect, that it's not just a concept, but I can start to relate more as a conscious choice to, when are places when I don't feel that, and how good does it feel when I get respect? And just, human needs, like if I'm glued to the conversation, I don't necessarily want to take a bio break, but if somebody says, hey, we're going to go for this amount of time, and here's when we're going to take our break. If you need to turn your camera off and go sooner, you can. But, at least if I'm paced in some way, then I feel like I'm taken into account, that it's not just the speaker's agenda to lay out all this other stuff on me, which is in some way, it's a little different angle, but I appreciate, Dan, as you bring up Conscious Loving, which is like one of those really key books for me a lot of times. But it's an expression of love within the circle that we're caring for one another. The respect is part of that, and it has other dimensions as well. So as you describe that, I'm here trying to look, where do I find resonance? I think that might be my key tag word. How do I find that resonating in me so that what I want to say as an individual may be less important than trying to tag on what you were saying in an attempt to try to find where's the resonance between us around that. And it'll go back and forth, but that the resonance becomes the shared interest that then weaves itself through whatever we're doing to create the emergent property. It's not something that I come with some other outside agenda or whatever, but we're always looking between us what is there, and even how I do that, because I take a lot of notes, and how do I shift from being a busy note taker, which is mostly idea, headspace, this bandwidth, to engaging with the screen. How do I, open more energetically in my chest and my heart and take you in? And as I do that, I feel vulnerability because I feel a tenderness. I feel a little quiveriness in my thing. It's like, oh, how do I, how to come in with more regard for who each of you are on my screen, and then, be with the not knowing of what I want to say, but that there's something that's just beautiful in that makes my eyes a little moist.
Yeah.
Thank you, all of you. So, Vic, I'm just talking to you. Here we are, the informal thing. So I'm going to ask the question of the group of sort of articulating. Could we all articulate what we kind of see as the difference between that more traditional hierarchical leadership style of pontificating, of didactic, versus, in other words, a presentation, versus what we're thinking of as facilitation, and how that even translate, that difference translates on Zoom. So what's a presentation look like? What's your definition of a presentation? I'll model here. The second I start getting somebody who wants to do an hour and a half of PowerPoint at me without my engaging my whole self, I'm less interested. Versus a facilitated conversation about some ideas that people put forth. It's not that I mind PowerPoint. It's just, for me, it's kind of a quantity thing. And I agree with you on Zoom. In my experience, if I have a group that I've met in person or repeatedly, I've been able to find that space, Eric, that you're talking about, of resonance, because we can return to something we've experienced or built slowly, even though we're working in the cyberspace. So if we could articulate, each of us, I just did, let's just take a round. I'm going to say I hand off to Eric next. But if we could just kind of, what do we see as the difference between presentation and facilitation? And is there a particular important piece about cyberland? Eric, did I give you enough time, or should I hand it off someplace else?
There we go. Yeah, I'm willing to jump with it. I don't know what my answer is going to be right immediately, but as you talk about people laying the PowerPoint on, I think the regard. I'm gonna come back to that theme again. Is that there's a different regard of the other. In presentation, information is the focus. That person has information. This person is a recipient. They need this, and I'm conveying that. And that feels like an old school thing, because information is so readily available everywhere, and we don't need to use our precious time in group spaces to, convey information. But there's something that's uniquely different and much more alive and moment to moment in live interaction that, is just not even in the same ballpark as, this presentation of information. And then that I have to be paying attention to you. And I notice, Victoria, as you nod your head, if I'm in presentation mode and looking at my PowerPoint slide deck and what's coming up next, I'm not going to see you nod your head. And I'm not going to see Bet nod her head too right now, or Kim smile. It's a different focus of attention. The attention is on the space between us.
Yeah.
Pause there.
That goes back to what Dan said about conscious loving. I'm going to say conscious living, conscious participation. Everything that we're doing reflects us being very intentional and conscious in the moment. Conscious loving. I love it. Okay, I'll say there. That's all I wanted to say. Anyone else on reflections of the difference between facilitation and presentation?
Yeah, Eric, that was inspiring, and at the same time, I see the difference between as a teacher or as a consultant, where I'm trying to be the smartest guy in the room or person, and as opposed to, there's a whole different energy about being the most vulnerable person, or the most loving person, or the most whatever the energy happens to be. But I'm always striving toward the higher energies, rather than, I don't want to bring fear or depression or any of those lower energies, or low energy, literally low human energy, to the table, rather being a catalyst for raising the energy. But it seems to me that, so there's the facilitating of the energy. There could also be the facilitating of the state. But because I'm mostly an agentic person, I want to facilitate understanding and action. So, that's a lot of what I do in my leadership world, but it's not always so fun. It doesn't have a fun energy. It could have a rational energy, but joyous, fun. I'm really keyed in on the energies of peace, love, and joy, as well as rationality. But so I think cultivating that energy is something that I'm always looking for. And it's a challenge. It's not something that I achieve even regularly.
I agree with you, Dan. It's definitely not a second nature core skill that I don't think we were born with this. This is a very much practice. I mean, you're like, it's practice skill that we have to be very thoughtful about.
Well, in our education, it's mostly rational. It's not emotional. It's not moral necessarily. And so we live in a, and this is about, from an integral evolutionary perspective, it is about being trans-rational without being irrational. But sometimes we're irrational, of course. But so what are we, what's the objective of the facilitation? I see it as on multiple lines, emotional, moral, cognitive. In my world, it's financial transformation from linear extractive economies to circular economies, which can get really dry really quick and people's eyes glaze over. And rather than participatory. So, because we got to participate with each other if we're going to embody this new or this emerging vision that wants to be born. Yeah.
And I know that Bet wants to talk, but I want to,
yeah.
Let me say this really quick, Bet. I think that it's interesting because, Eric, you called it presenting information presentation. And back to who's your audience? I teach college kids and I can make them read things. And if they show up in class and they haven't read it and we have a conversation, they feel stupid. But that's those low energies, Dan. So, how do we present information or have information available that people then can use with their whole self in order to engage in this emerging understanding? So I don't want to, I agree with you, Eric, it's information presentation, but that's part of our questing, is how do we stimulate learning? Well, with new ideas. How do we have new ideas? So, okay, Bet, I just had to say that.
This this is all resonating a lot with me, Eric. Just I want to make sure. I love that word. So I used to teach software architecture workshops at various different conferences. And I never lectured because I found that was the least efficient way to get people to learn new things. Instead, I gave a few definitions on a few slides, and then we did exercises. Said get people to get into small groups. One of them would be a database analyst role, one would be an architect, and one would be like a user. And then I'd give them a scenario, and they had to sort of solve a puzzle together with their hats on. And at the end, I would go around and let everyone have the microphone and share what they learned from this experience, which was usually it's not about the technical thing, it's about the relationship or whatever it was. And this was the best way for me to help people have these big aha moments instead of me standing up there like, you have to listen to your users. That didn't help them. At the end of the day, they didn't leave with empathy for their users. If that was the thing I was trying to help them. So yeah, I even with a very technical subject, I still think like lecturing person at the top of the room is not how you get people to leave to take that action. So I'm wondering, Dan, are you able to create like exercises of some sort, small little groups of like people playing roles to help them start visualizing this new future? Or is there a way?
Well, if you can do it with software, I'm sure there's a way in my world. So, so that's you can kind of just by sharing that show a pathway. It's not coming to me right now, but it's now asking a different question. How can we role play ourselves to embodying, to use the word on that theme, to embodying where we are wanting to lead because we think there's a better place for all of us to go to. I've actually just, I've been at this work with this one association now as their leader for like the last 20 years. And I'm just now soliciting from the consultants rather than the practitioners and the doers and the owners. It's a compost association. And we have a lot of education stuff in there. But what we're talking about is using our role of turning organics into healthy soil, and how do we engage not only our customers and ourselves, but all of the other stakeholders that have a stake in what we're doing, which it turns out is almost everybody, because everybody eats food and produces food scraps and has landscapes and likes plants, in their environment. So, and whether it's farmers or whether it's, so I have a really broad constituency that I'm trying to bring in. So Beth, you kind of threw down the gauntlet there, and I'm going to have to sit with that for a while.
And my point is, Beth, it immediately brings to mind, how do we use the breakout rooms in Zoom to do role play? How do we use the breakout rooms in Zoom to do fishbowl? So a lot of the techniques that we'd use for collaboration and then collaborativity in person, how do we actually, it feels to me like, wouldn't it be cool to make that a support pod? To just actually have an idea about one of those techniques and then just try it out with this group and see what happened. That would be totally cool. I'm going to say, I'm looking at the time. So Vic, in this informal way, how about if what we do is talking about executing a facilitation, would you talk about the leaning into, would you just go
Yeah,
ahead and
I got it.
sense that? And then I'll sort of talk about these things that I was going to talk about down separately. I'll just sort of embed it in what you're talking about. I promise I'm not interrupting. I'll raise my hand like this. Okay.
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 So everyone's reflection, this is how I'll wrap it up, Kim. Not wrap it up, but this is how I'll lean into our next segment for everyone. Everyone's response and reflections and ideas fit into 3 categories. And you can fight me on this, but I'm almost positive they perfectly fit into our 3 categories. And I'll tell you these 3 categories because they're important for the event that we are producing in October, right? So it's an embodied event. The way we've created this event is in these 3 categories. There should be a mind, body, and spirit element to things that we're doing. So we're asking you to reflect and think, what is the difference between presentation and facilitation? Everyone's answers fit into these categories. So for example, this is the real example. Bet said, I'm very respectful of time zones. That is being respectful and thoughtful about the body element, right? Okay, so then here's an example. Bet, then it's up to you to think about the spirit and mind to fill in those gaps, right? So the question is, what do you lean into when you are facilitating or presenting something? Is your answers fitting to these 3 categories, body, mind, and spirit? Can you do all 3? What's the gap? What do you feel comfortable doing? And the age-old question, the age-old statement, right, is like, whatever you feel comfortable doing, well, that means the other ones are your gaps and go practice those. Right? So that's how we're wrapping. That's how I wanted. And okay. And other example, feeling in the moment, feeling the body's response, spirit, acknowledging, and being conscious and reflective, mind. Everyone said something that fit into these 3 categories. So to me, that is the one little takeaway: body, mind, and spirit. Think about that when we are presenting information, facilitating information, educating people. Kim.
Yeah. So Vic and I were talking about how do we understand that as teachers, as facilitators, I can't talk either, Vic, facilitators, we lean into our preference. And yes, we need to cover it all. So we were talking about especially opening a space. So I'm going to ask that it's way too late as far as I'm concerned, because we only have a few minutes and I'm kinesthetic. So I would have liked in this presentation for me to get to actually feel my body a long time ago. So I knew this was going to happen, but I'm suggesting, right now in the moment, when we're talking about having this space where we actively collaborate, we are actually learning and growing and pushing those edges. Can we still feel our body? Are we still aware in ourselves? Do we spend any time being there with our body? And Vic and I especially wanted to talk about opening a space. So this will be my last inquiry. And I'll ask for everybody's reflections, round of reflections, and that's sort of where we're going to be for time. But in spirit, there are a lot of people who resonate, again, that word, but ritual, a known, comfortable, beautiful, radiant thing, practice, but in a certain way. That ritual allows some people's spirit to just go, okay, relax. I can expand in this space. Some people want to stop and use their body as a tool. I want to breathe. Or I want to phenomenally understand that my feet what my feet feel and what I, as Dan said, the aromas of our of where we are, that then could we transfer, could we actually make present in a cyberspace using the imaginal? And then I want to talk about the imaginal as a function of the mind and how we might open or keep open or close a space in an imaginal way, a functioning of the mind. And then again, I'm going to lastly point out, what's the language for this? Eric, I'm going to say, when Dan and you and I were talking a long time ago, Dan, a long time ago, Dan, it was like more than 15 years. but we kept saying, is there language for this yet? And I think that that's something we still want to develop. And I'll stop with that. And I'll say, let's have a closing round. What else might you want to reflect in closure?
I'm to those three, I using those all the time because of, the education and how we met and the whole aqua thing, body, mind, spirit, self, culture, and nature. I've been spending more time on the self, culture, and nature piece. So emotions always come in, and emotions can and are felt in the body, but they're also surrounding the story or the narrative we're making up in our mind based on our capability to make up that story. And whether it's a really pleasing, what's the tone of that story emotionally? So I'm thinking more about, I don't know, I think I learned it from Jeremy Lent. He brought up the notion of animate intelligence, which is something I did learn in yoga and modern dance. And that's really important to me about being the intelligence of the body, including the mind, but not, only intelligence isn't just that. So emotional intelligence or loving intelligence. So that's what I'm getting from this. And how do we cultivate that in a very stripped down media? Because it's sensual. I mean, it's all our senses, but we only have a couple of our senses here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unless in that story, there's the imaginal.
The imaginal, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't circle back, but I agree 100% that, from some of the new metamodern sociologists talking about how we all live in an imaginal world in our symbolic system here. But that imaginal world is not just words and concepts. It's also, our physical presence or expression. Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Bet, Eric?
I really have enjoyed this session and all these words that just got posted in: phenomenal, imaginal. My brain is just going off in all kinds of, I feel like this was just the beginning and now we need another 2 hours together. Unfortunately, we've shortened our session to 1 hour. I don't know whose idea that was, but anyways. So yeah, there's just so much stuff here because really imaginal, it doesn't matter if we're in the same room smelling each other's body odor or not. We can really go off on all kinds of fun things together and tell stories or, make up stories or draw on a PowerPoint together. There's just so many fun things. So I just feel like this is the beginning, and that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Can you do a session on drawing together on PowerPoint? Can you do that?
Of course. Yeah. During the very beginning of the pandemic, my improv team started doing things on Zoom, And then we got kind of bored with it after a while. But there are definitely fun things that you can do. So yeah, there's a lot of, I've been coming up with some sketches actually based on he's sending his AI assistant to our last board meeting. Anyways, that's me. Eric.
Yeah, so there's a lot stimulated by this. This has really been wonderful. And, I'm just looking, where do I sit with it? And, how do I sit with it, for instance, in these few moments, wishing we had more time, what do I come to as, my little piece that comes into this? Something I didn't tag on before that I want to bring back in from something you were talking about, Dan, about the positive states that you try to cultivate and intentionally bring in to be in higher energy states. Just to name the phenomenon, I guess, of transmission. In a lot of different ways, but we're transmitting our states. And if I'm intentional about that in whatever I do, then I'm watching, I'm reading, I'm paying attention to, what stream in me do I want to bring forward? There's all kinds of things, it's like my mind is stimulated now. I can go in 100 different directions, but I need to choose something. And what's the basis for that? And to me, there's a slowing down and a listening inside and a listening to others. And how do we, play with that together? How do I listen to me while I listen to you, not losing track of either? And that's a cultivation practice to keep continuing. So I think I'll leave with that for now.
Great.
Beautiful.
And we're at the top of the hour. Cube together drawing and
Yeah, Kim can't write and do cyber
and think and talk at the
She
same
can't
time.
do that. She already said to Vic a long time ago, this is old and it's just not the way it works. So I just wanted to write it down there. Cyber, that's called autocorrect, obviously. Thank you. That was fun.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for joining. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to our hypothesis and our questions that we've pondered with each other. And really, I hope that it just, gets the brain moving a bit to think about facilitation or presentation virtually in a different way.
And the way I'm going to close is I really hope that we use this support pod to do those 4 things that Vic and I were talking about. Yes, it's lovely to have community. And yes, it's lovely to have this place that we can try out new ideas. But if we actually practice and we say, support me like this, I would love to be supported with some of these notions that have come up. How do we do that? Can we have a support pod on practicing that and actually speaking that to people? Can we have, Dan, I self-culture and nature, what's that look like, of what we talked about? How can we use breakout rooms or this or that? Let's just take little bits of what we've talked about and say, okay, let's have a support pod and try out this idea. That's my advertising. All right.
Invitation on the table.
Invitation.
I have an advertisement before we end recording. Everyone go buy your tickets now. Available on the Eventbrite. Go to ILIAnow.com and click the Embodied Integral Boulder link and buy the tickets. They're on sale right now. So get your tickets.
And Bet, I did as a test. Hopefully you'll check the back end and make sure.
I did. I'm sorry if I didn't email you. Your ticket has been bought.
Okay, good.
Purchased.
And our
Yay.
system,
All right, see you everyone next time.